This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
Happy Mother's Day. It's a thrill to celebrate it with you. So I found myself several months ago, one of my very favorite leaders and communicators and thinkers is a guy named Andy Stanley. Many of you know that. And he asked some questions and made some observations in the form of a message that I found myself returning to time and time again here a few months ago. And I'm kind of slow, but after returning to it to the third or fourth time, I thought, wow, if this is so valuable to me in my journey, then perhaps this would be to my friends at Narrate as well. And so I bounced that off of the staff, and they all agreed that this conversation about labels would be perfect this morning. So if you're a guest of this, welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. This is kind of a unique weekend for us. It's Mother's Day for you, and so we like to celebrate Mother's Day holiday in a unique way, and so we're kind of going to step out of this series that we've been in called Attuned and have this conversation about labels. And I just want to be really clear on the front end about 99% of what I'm going to communicate and wrestle with this morning, that they're not thoughts that originate with me. In fact, let me just be clear, about 99% of the thoughts I share up here don't originate with me ever, but I think whether you're a Christ follower or someone that's just kind of intrigued and don't really understand who Jesus is, you'll find this morning to be tremendously helpful as you journey through life. So we got to start this way. What is this? Anybody? It's a label maker. Good job. And what do label makers make? You guys are sharp. This is going to be a fantastic morning. So I actually, in the spirit of cheesiness, created a few labels just to kind of get us in the flow of thinking labels. I created some labels, and so I thought if they were you, that you could stand up and we'll give you this label and you can wear it, because we know that people love the spotlight to be on them at church. So the first label I have here is, it could be wow. I didn't think of that, but it's in fact not wow. It's mom. So do we have any moms in the room? Raise your hand if you're a mom. Come on. Okay, so Laura, you're the closest mom, so we're going to need you to come get this label. How about I know that this is fantastic and incredibly engaging.
Awesome.
Yeah, good job. Laura, everybody, say hi to Laura. She would love to talk to you after the service, meet you, and maybe even have you over for dinner this week. So, okay, how about grandma? Do we have any grandmas in the room? Okay, raise your hand. Hi, proud grandma. All the grandmas are in the back. We have a theme. Okay, so I can't see all I can see. Would you come? Yeah, would you get grandma? Good job. It's not a very competitive bunch. I'm going to find Roy a label because he thinks this is really funny. How about great-grandmas? Do we have any great-grandmas in the room? No great-grandmas? Well, Roy, this is you. You get to be great-grandma, and you get to be great-great-grandma, because I'm just going to assume that if there's no great-grandmas, there's no great-great-grandmas. How about, so good job, your wife can be great-great-grandma, and you can be grandma. How about wannabe grandmas? Any wannabe grandmas? Oh, yeah. Jerry, I saw that hand. You can. I'm just. Come on up here. Yeah. You get to be the wannabe grandma. Yep. Yeah. So you can just send this to your daughter and tell her that you got a gift for Mother's Day. Good job. Jerry, that was fun. Okay, so let me ask you this. Who gets the right to label something? Ever thought about that? I have three entities in mind. One is the manufacturer. Like if you manufacture something, you get to put a label on it, right? That's why just about everything you own and wear and purchase has a label on it. In fact, everyone here is wearing a shirt. Yes. And everyone here has a label somewhere on that shirt, and if you're like me, you get infuriated by how difficult it is to find a t-shirt without a visible label on it, because you want to wear the same shirt every week, and it's easier to do if you don't have a label on it. So manufacturers, they get to label things, right? And that's good, that's fine, that seems just. The other entity that I can think of is that gets to label something are the owners. How many of you have pet names for your vehicles? Like Betty or Louie, or like you're among that crowd that actually names you. Go ahead, raise your hand, proud and high. Yeah. How many of you find that extraordinarily weird? Yeah, it's very weird. But you know what's even more weird is if I showed up at your house and went like, hey, so where's Shamiqua? And you went, who's Shamiqua? And it's like, oh, that's what I call your Outback. it would be weird because you can name things, owners name things, right? So manufacturers and owners, the other entity I can think of is a purchaser, right? When you were a kid and your mom bought you a new backpack, what was the first thing she said? Write your name on it, unless she was type A and she couldn't handle your penmanship and then she did it for you. Or when your kid comes to you and says, can I take this basketball or whatever this is, this iPod to school, what's the first thing that you do? You open up that drawer. By the way, am I the only family that has that drawer at my house? I was asking some guys this last week, and one said, no, but I don't have kids. And I said, well, and the other guy said, well, I didn't have kids either, and we had a drawer like this, but my wife finally fixed it. Do you know what I'm talking about? That drawer, the junk drawer that, I hate that drawer. Anyway, you open up that drawer, you get out the Sharpie, and you write the name on it. So three things. Really this morning, I just want to ask one question. I think it's a question that if you're a middle school student, how you engage this question, whether or not you engage what I think is the correct answer to this question, whether you're a high school student, a middle school student. I mean, this is kind of true of all of us, but I think what you'll find throughout the morning, whether you're an adult or a student, is like, oh man, like that question changes the direction, it changes the quality of our lives. If you're someone here and maybe you're in that proverbial like bottom of the pit place, the rock bottom place, and we've all been there and we all hope to never be there again, but maybe that's where you're at, maybe that's why you're here, maybe that's why you're considering following Jesus, maybe that's why you started following Jesus, that proverbial bottom place, I'll bet you, if you'll spend some time with us this morning and then think more about this over the week, I'll bet you what you will see is that proverbial hole, that rock bottom place, has everything to do with this question. And you're refusing to accept what I think is the correct answer to the question. If you're someone that's in that place, and I think even more practically, that this question and the correct answers to it, I think give us some really clear handles that can allow you to climb out of that place. Some of you, as you process your greatest mistakes, your greatest regrets, your greatest shames, even the deepest broken part of yourself, I think what you'll see is it's all tied, it's all related, it's all connected to this one question. And the question is simply this: who has the right to label you? Seems appropriate conversation on Mother's Day. I think it's relevant to all of us, but it seems particularly appropriate on Mother's Day. Like, who has the right to label you? I mean, we talked about who has the right to label shirts and cars and toasters and things like that, but who gets to label you? Who has that right? Because you have labels, you carry labels, you're aware of labels. Maybe you've placed them on yourself, maybe they've been placed on you, but you have them. And my challenge to you this morning, and we're just going to keep revisiting it, and we're actually going to send you out of the door this morning with a gift to this end is just to spend some time thinking, like, who gets to label you? Who gets that privilege? Who gets that honor? Who have you assigned that task? I can think of three labels that I'm sure there's many more, but I could think of three labels that stood out to me over the course of my life. The first one I received when I was in the fourth grade, as best I can tell. I had great parents. I grew up with an older sister, 3 years older than me, and a mom and a dad who was a railroader, which means that, he was a classic blue-collar guy who did shift work, and he was around as often as he could be, but I spent a lot of time with my mom and my older sister, which meant that I played Barbies and things like that. I had no choice. It also means, and I didn't really begin to understand this until recently, that to be real frank, like I just always connected better with girls. Just kind of was the deal. I had one really good friend, a kid named Joey, who lived across the alley from me, and he was a year older than me. And so I think part of this was also the fact that relationally, like, I'm not that guy that needs 30 good friends. I just need a couple like that. That sounds really self-absorbed, and it is, but like this is kind of how I function. I don't take very good care of people, so I just assume to only be responsible for a couple. And I had this really good friend who lived across the alley, and so we spent weekends together, and we spent summers together, and, like the post-school stuff. And so in particular then, when I went to school, I had friends, and I had the guys that I played sports with and stuff, but I just didn't connect with them as well as I did whatever respective girls were in the class. Now, I wish someone would have coached me a little bit better on this, and that's not taking a shot at my parents or anything like that, but I wish someone would have coached me with it a little better. But the way it translated is I was that kid who had, like, girlfriends, if that's what you call them, starting in about third grade, And I still remember when my parents came home from my fourth grade parent-teacher conference, and my teacher's name was Miss Linhart. Now, if you remember when you were in school, if your teacher's name had like not MS, MISS in front of it, that was a sign, because they had more energy and they had more time and they were more involved. Do you remember this? Like, the Miss teachers were fresh out of the gates. They were all those different things. And my parents came home from that fourth grade parent-teacher conference, and they were mad. And what they were mad about was because Miss Lenhart, who kept a pretty tightly structured ship, was mad that I was preoccupied with girls and girlfriends, and I was a distraction in the class. And so my parents, they just landed on me. And it was around that time when one of the kids who I spent some time with, and he was one of the cool kids, which is why I didn't spend very much time with him, but he was one of the cool kids, and his dad was the varsity basketball coach. You know, he was that kid when you were growing up. He came to school one day, and he said to my friends, who were always wondering why I wasn't with them, I was always hanging out with girls on the playground, he said, "My mom says that Adam's a ladies' man." And for the rest of my growing up in elementary school, whenever my school classmate boys, whenever they wanted to make fun of me, that's the way there's the ladies' man. It's horrible. I've never told people that, by the way, so if you could just keep that to yourselves. I don't even think I've told my wife that. The other label that I could think of was also I received in school. That's kind of the way this works oftentimes, right? As I said, my best friend growing up was a kid named Joey who was a year older than me, and so he always had his friends who were in his grade, and you'd try to hang out with them, and you always just felt like a schmuck. Do you remember that? Like, you just never quite fit with him, and they didn't really want anything to do with me, so he'd hang out with me, but when he was with his friends, they wouldn't. But that all kind of changed in 8th grade, because after 8th grade, I made an all-star team that there was only one other kid my age on that team, and everybody else on that team had just finished their freshman year, and that was my friend, and he was on that team, and so were his friends. And for whatever reason, in that kind of crucial transition from 8th grade to my freshman year, all these kids who just finished their first year of high school, they let me start hanging out with them, and they liked me, and at the same time, I lived in this kind of perpetual feeling of not fitting, and so you worked really hard to fit, and all of those different things, and when I get nervous, I talk. Some of you know this. And so I remember one day, because you remember your freshman year, if you had friends who weren't freshmen, you got to go to lunch in a car, and your freshman classmates didn't, and that was kind of a big deal. So that was kind of my situation. And I remember riding back from lunch in my friend Burt Hall. He was cool, and then his friend next to him was like the cool guy who mostly didn't like me but put up with me. His name was Brandon, and we were driving in his Chevy Citation. But this wasn't the 4-door blue one, I didn't even know they made these. He had a 2-door SS Chevy Citation with a cowl on the hood, 4-speed. So cool. So terrible, but so cool at the time. And I must have been talking in their ear, and Brandon turned around and looked at me, and he said, "From now on, I'm calling you Homer." And I was like, Homer? The only Homer I had frame of reference for was Homer Simpson. He said, no. And they had just been learning about Homer from Greek philosophy, and Homer was the great storyteller. And so for the rest of the time, when I hung around with Brandon, whenever I started talking too much, he would just say Homer, and it would shame me into shutting my pie hole. The other label, if I could just humiliate myself one more time, many of you have heard me talk about baseball, and I wasn't all that good at it, but that was my thing. And my game was I couldn't throw very fast, but I had really good accuracy. And then when I played my first year of Legion, that was the early mid-'90s, I guess, and I watched Jack Morris win the World Series with the Toronto Blue Jays. Anybody? Yeah, this is some baseball history. And if you remember Jack Morris, what was Jack Morris's pitch of choice? His go-to pitch? Anybody? Where's Morgan? Where's Morgan? Yeah. What was it? You lose your baseball card. Because you were like 6 when Jack Morris was winning the World Series. It was a split finger. He had a deadly split finger. And I remember watching the World Series, and I would hold a baseball in my hand, and I would stretch out my fingers, and I would work on the split finger. And so when I was playing baseball, I couldn't throw very hard. I could throw low 70s at best, but I could put it where I wanted it, and then I had a really good changeup. And anybody who understands baseball understands it doesn't matter if you can't throw hard. If you can throw a good, accurate fastball and follow it with a good changeup, then you're tough to hit. And so that was my success point. But that also means that like a knuckleball pitcher, when I had a bad day, it was bad, really bad. Now, we had this teacher in my school, in high school. Every school has this teacher, the guy with the Russell athletic shorts, right? They come about this long. and they might be painted on, or he might jump from the top bunk of the bunk bed, you're not sure, and then the white polo shirt that's mostly polyester and the big yellow stains, and are you with me? And every one of these guys always used to be the head football coach, right? And he's not the head football coach anymore. He's like the water boy, but he used to be the head football coach. And this was the guy who was the PE teacher, and there was really only two classes of people at my high school. If you were a freshman guy, you either played football or you didn't. And if you did, he liked you, and if you didn't, he hated you, and he ridiculed you, and you had him for freshman PE. And actually, there was a third category. If you played football in middle school but didn't in high school, then there was a whole new level of hatred that entered into the conversation. And so that was me. I didn't play football my freshman year. I didn't feel like I had the right because I played quarterback in middle school, and we finished up middle school 0-13-1. And the one game that we tied was 0-0. So I just didn't feel like I had much to contribute to the program. But he hated me for that, just despised me for that. And so the end of my freshman year, he always stood by the drinking fountain too when you walked into the school, and he was always there, and you always knew, like, and he would talk and chip at you and say hi to you, whatever, creepy, stare at the girls, all that kind of, I don't know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, freshman year then, as I was playing baseball, he kind of heard like that Adam pitched and I was playing Legion, and so he came to one of my games and he sat in the bleacher right by the dugout, and this was one of those days where I just didn't have it. And I was getting shelled. I know I got out of the first inning. I know I didn't get out of the second inning. And as I came back from the dugout after the first inning, he said, "Hey, Peanut, that all the harder you can throw, Peanut?" And he managed to get Peanut out towards me about, 6 or 7 times in the matter of my running from the mound to the dugout. And so for the rest of my high school career, when I would walk from the parking lot into the gym, there would be him standing by the drinking fountain with his Russell athletic shorts and all, and he, "Hey, Peanut." He hated me, and I'd under my breath, and so that was kind of the deal. Now, all that just to give you some time, like, what are your labels? What are you carrying? Because you're carrying something. Probably some of them were on the video. Maybe even you don't think about it because they're good labels. Maybe it's athlete, or maybe it's hot, or some of you wish you knew somebody who was hot, or some of you used to be hot, or there's all kinds of options there. There's one that I think transcends every middle school and high school existence. It's the label popular, right? And it's a label that you either carry or you don't. You're popular, you're unpopular, you wish you were popular, you say you don't care if you're popular. What labels are you carrying? Because here's the thing with labels. Labels, they hem us in, and then they keep opportunity out, don't they? Like a label, if you accept a label, it forms and shapes the way you think about yourself, the way you think about others, the way you think about the world, the way you think others think about you. Like a label, especially a wrong label, it just holds it all in. And it keeps opportunity out. And even worse, the wrong label, it keeps you in, it blocks you in, and it leaves God out. So what labels are you carrying? I think it's important. In fact, that brings us back to that initial question, because they're powerful, labels are. And my hope for this morning, call it cliche. If you've been around church, maybe you're already going like, this is a classic identity in Christ conversation. I think it is so crucial, whether you're just considering Christ or you've been walking with him for decades, to kind of reorientate yourself to what labels are you carrying. And my hope for this morning is that some of you will begin a process of peeling some inaccurate labels off and beginning to engage in the conversation of what are the correct labels? What are the labels your Heavenly Father has for you? What is the way he invites you to think about yourself? Because you know who has the right to label you? The one who made you, the one who owns you, and the one who purchased you. If you're a Christ follower, you know that time after time after time in the New Testament, the way Paul and Jesus and others talk about Jesus and the cross and his coming to earth and the reality of his bloodshed, they say things like, God purchased you with his blood, that he owns you, that he made you, and he knows you. Here's the deal. I think if you can take what we're talking about this morning, I think whether you're a student or you're 20, or you're 30, or you're 50, or you're 70 years old, I think if you can take this, your life will begin to move in a way different direction to a way different place than will those around you. If you'll begin to push off the wrong labels and receive only the ones Jesus has for you. Now, of course, that raises the question, how? Like, how do we begin to do that? And there's this one really short, rather simple, but not easy, there's more labels, verse that I want us to look at. It's found in the book of Romans. The Apostle Paul, who of course is the planter of many churches in the first century, pioneered many the spread of the gospel beyond really just Israel proper. He was writing this letter to a group of people in Rome. And in verse 2, I just want us to kind of work through this verse rather slowly and ask a couple of questions. He says this, do not conform. You know what conform is, right? It's to shape yourself. Do not conform, he says, to the pattern of this world. And you know what a pattern is? A pattern, when I was suggested this way, I was like, wow, that is profound. A pattern is something that exists before you got there. Like a pattern is, it's a label or a desired label that was there before you got there. You all know this from middle school. Like what you know, whether you're in middle school, it's harder to know this when you're in middle school, but what you know, for those of you who haven't been in middle school for eons even, is that long before you got to middle school, long before anybody gets to middle school, that there's a pattern in place. And the pattern determines what popular looks like. That the pattern determines what likable, what lovable, what acceptable looks like. There's a pattern, and Paul is going, listen, there's these patterns. Don't conform to them. Don't allow them to shape and impact the way you think about yourself. And what's true of middle school and high school, it's true of every area of life, isn't it? Like long before you had your first kid, long before you were a young married couple, long before you were in your 40s, wherever you're at, no matter what your place and stage in life is, there was a pattern put in place before you got there. And if you don't apply what we're talking about this morning, like if you don't embrace this truth, you know what happens? You show up at that spot and you ask, what's the pattern? Like, what am I supposed to look like? What are the labels I'm supposed to be seeking? How do I get there? You just allow them to control you. In fact, did you ever think of it this way? Did you realize that when you allow someone to label you and you receive that label, you essentially give them control over you? Ever thought of it like that? It's like you're saying, you're the boss of me. Now, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I went from a freshman who was having conversations with high school coaches about playing junior college baseball, so that was as good as it's ever going to get, to a sophomore who didn't play baseball, who didn't pitch anyway. And then there was more factors than just one guy calling me peanut, but that was a big factor. And what I didn't do was say to him, like, hey, listen here, Mr. Russell Athletic Shorts. Let me explain the game of baseball to you. Like, you don't have to throw the ball 95 miles an hour. If you can put the ball where you want the ball and then you can chase it with a changeup, you can be wildly successful. So sit down, Mr. Russell Athletic Shorts. Like, I didn't do that. Instead, I received the label. When you allow someone, whether it's a boss or a coworker or a friend or a parent or a stranger or someone you used to know or someone you wish you knew or someone that you'd like to impress, when you allow them to label you, you're saying, here, you're the boss. And Paul's going, why would you do that? Like, why would you try to conform yourself to these patterns that they have absolutely no sensitivity to who you are and your circumstances and who your Heavenly Father is? Like, your Heavenly Father's going, why would you do that? So do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. Like, be changed. Throw off the labels. How? By the renewing of your mind. See, Paul's going, listen, you have to change the way you think about labels. You have to change the way you think about patterns. If you're a student, I would almost guarantee that almost every adult in this room is thinking to themselves right now, man, I wish somebody would have told me that. I wish I could have got this when I was 15 years old. I wish I could have got this when I was a freshman in college. I wish I would have understood this when I was in the 6th grade. I wish someone would have sat me down and somehow got through to my head that the labels game, the pattern game, it's horrible, it's destructive, it'll ruin you. Much of the pain in this room And the history in this room, it's playing the label game. It's allowing people who didn't make us and didn't purchase us and don't own us to control us with their labels. If you're a student, this is your chance to get this one right. Because God is a redeeming God, and those of us who didn't get it right initially, like God salvages that pain, but please don't misunderstand like redeemed pain for life without having to learn from that mistake. If you're a student and you get this one right, I guarantee your life will look dramatically different than your peers at your 10-year reunion. Just guarantee it. And if you're not a student and you think like I haven't gotten this one right, well, the great thing about Jesus is it's not too late. Because then listen to what Paul says. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. See, labels have a will for you. They make decisions about you. They determine things about your future. They make statements about your value and your worth and your potential and what you should be and what you ought to be and what you are. And what Paul is contrasting that with is, you know what? God does too. And the labels of others are held in tension with the labels of God. Did you know that God has a will for you? And even more so, did you see that what Paul is saying here is that labels can cause you to miss God's will? They can cause you to completely miss what he has for you. And then Paul offers these few words that just tweak and shape what he means by his will. He says, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good. That's a hard one to accept, isn't it? In fact, I heard Andy Stanley say, and I thought that's a fair observation. He says, that's hard to accept until you're about 30 years old. Because until then, God's will looks intrusive. It looks, weak. It looks too conservative. And I don't mean that in a political sense. It looks old-fashioned. Because when you bump up against what God suggests about sexuality, when you bump up what God suggests about the way you treat people, when you bump up against what God suggests about labels, it seems horribly inconvenient. And Paul says, no, it's good. It's pleasing. You know what that means? It means you'll like it. My friend Fred has this statement. He says, God is in the business of raising the bar on what it takes for you to have fun. What he's saying there is God's will is far more thrilling than it looks on the surface. His good, his pleasing, and his perfect will. You know why it's perfect? Because it reflects who he made you to be. It's given in accordance with who you are. Labels have no sensitivity for you. No sensitivity for your unique situation, your unique strengths, your unique weaknesses, your unique callings. And by the way, none of those things mean like what comes easy to you, but what God's called you to work hard at. Labels, they're completely insensitive to that. And Paul is going, okay, we all have a choice to make. We all have to hold in tension these two options, like the label option and conforming in the patterns of this world option, or God's labels, what God says of you. So let me ask you, who has the right to label you? It's a proverbial crossroads. You have a choice to make, and what Paul is saying is this is going to take some hard work in your skull, in your brain, in your heart, in your soul to begin to change the way that you label yourself, the way you allow yourself to be labeled. It's going to take some work to peel that away. So here's my challenge to you this week. This week, I'm going to challenge you to spend some time reflecting, thinking. And I don't know if you do that best when you're in the garage, or whether you're on a long drive, or whether you're walking, or whether you're in your office alone, or whether you're running. I don't know how you think best. I don't want to throw a tight net around that. I do think that like creating space to think is important. And my challenge to you is to create that space and ask yourself two questions. What are your labels? And where do they come from? To begin to mine that out. What are the labels you are carrying? And where do they come from? And then obviously the big number 3 is, and who really gets the right to label you? Because you assign that authority, you grant that privilege to whoever you want. And ladies, because it's Mother's Day, we're going to give you some added incentive to do this, because in a moment the band's going to come back up here and we're going to take communion. We're going to sing a couple more songs. And there's also these white envelopes on every one of the communion tables, and inside that envelope is a card that has these two questions on it. What are your labels and where do they come from? As well as a $4 gift card to Fire Tower Coffee. And that's just our gift. Happy Mother's Day, Happy Ladies' Day. It's for women. And the invitation is to spend some time at Fire Tower this week and to engage those two questions. What are your labels? And where do they come from? And dudes, I don't know about you. You just have to do it on your own, I guess. Listen, if you're here and you're just trying to figure out Jesus and his role and what it would look like to believe in him and whether or not it's just some kind of mythology or whether or not it's some arbitrary religion, what the Bible claims is that God made you, that he made you for purpose, that he knows you, and that he rescued you by the blood of Jesus, that he purchased you with his blood. That's the invitation of Jesus. And central to that invitation is when you step into, when you believe, when you accept that, whatever language you want to use, when you become a Christ follower, the invitation is to change the way that you think about yourself. And the great challenge of the Christian mind is to begin to think about themselves and others in ways that run parallel with the way God thinks about themselves and others. And that's work.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.